Thank you, John. It's always good to be missed. One of the most disturbing things in politics in the 20th century is that half the population is ignorant of history and the other half doesn't give a hang. It's the only way I can account for what I would have to call the stupidity of leaders when they talk about Islam and what Islam means to us in the modern world. To most Americans, Muhammad was just another prophet, and Islam was just another religion. So we have in the world Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Shintoism, and a bunch of other isms along the way. They couldn't be more wrong. Islam is, without question, the most dominating religion the world has ever seen. And at the same time, it is the most dangerous the world has ever seen. No, I am not saying that all Muslims are dangerous. There's no earthly reason why you should feel intimidated by a poor lady who's in, Walmart with her head covered in obviously the Muslim style. You should not look upon her as an enemy or as a danger to you. She isn't. Many Muslims are just as ignorant of their history as we are of theirs. The only reason that individual Muslims are dangerous is because they are a part of a religion that does not allow them to question or to dissent. There is no way in which, for example, Muslim or a wing of Islam could rise up and dissent against the tactics and the methods being used by some other part of Islam. The religion itself simply does not allow it. And by the definition that most of us apply to cult, Islam is easily the biggest and most dangerous cult the world has ever seen or ever will see. We miss this important fact because we're accustomed to see cults as small and isolated. This cult is worldwide, growing, and more dangerous than we would ever expect any cult to be. I was startled recently when I saw a little article by Dennis Prager, who had listing off a number of statistics that a person ought to look at and think about. One of them, he said, was the number of Muslims in the world, more than 1 billion. The number of Muslim demonstrations against Islamic terror, approximately 2. Period. At all in recent memory. Now, why is this? Why are Muslims all but silent about terrorism except for those who advocate it? Inquiring minds want to know. Now, those who know their history may already know this, but I want to remind us of a few things. There was an article in Time magazine, a recent issue. It was the week of July 4th, so they were looking at the Americans, the Founding Fathers, and so forth, and the feature of that issue was one Thomas Jefferson, third president of the United States. In this magazine, there was an article by Christopher Hitchens that rather startled me because I kind of knew what he was talking about here, but I had never really quite got it in focus. Christopher Hitchens, by the way, is English, writing this occasion for Time magazine. He writes, and this is, by the way, the July 5th issue of Time magazine, if you'd like to look it up and read the entire article. Within days of his March 1801 inauguration as the third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson ordered a naval and military expedition to North Africa without the authorization of Congress to put down regimes involved in slavery and piracy. The war was the first in which the U.S. flag was carried and planted overseas. It saw the baptism by fire of the U.S. Marine Corps, whose anthem speaks of action to the shores of Tripoli. It prefigured later struggles with both terrorism and jihad. And the one thing we're going to have to get used to in a modern world is that there is terrorism on the one hand, and there is jihadism on the other hand. And jihadism is terrorism. It's not something other than terrorism. It is their fundamental tool of war. The Barbary states of North Africa, Algiers, Tunis, Morocco, and Tripoli, which is today's Libya, had for centuries sustained themselves by preying on the maritime commerce of others. Now, if you know your geography, you'll realize that in that world of that time, the Mediterranean was key to commerce in that part of the world. More shipping went up and down through the Mediterranean that people could prey on than you could possibly imagine. Income was raised by direct theft, the extortion of bribes or protection, and the capture of crews and passengers to be used as slaves. Now, this figure startled me. Historian Robert Davis, in his book Christian Slaves, Muslim Masters, said that, and he's writing about the period of time from 1500 to 1800, he estimates that as many as 1.25 million Europeans and Americans were enslaved by the Barbary traders. 1.25 million Europeans and Americans were captured and made slaves, sold on slave markets by the Barbary raiders. They struck as far north as England and Ireland. It appears, for example, that almost every inhabitant of the Irish village of Baltimore was carried off in 1631. These raiders went into Ireland and carried off into slavery, sold them off as slaves, an entire village of the Irish in that year. That's the kind of thing that they were dealing with, and something which I think most people today are totally ignorant that it ever went on and have no idea what its roots were. Later, Hitchens goes on to tell us that as events began to develop, this is prior to the time when Thomas Jefferson was president of the United States. He was a diplomat. I think he must have been the ambassador to Paris. I forget the name of the Secretary of State at that time. Oh, it was John Jay. Secretary of State John Jay decided to do what the European powers did and pay tribute to the Barbary sultans in exchange for safe passage as well as for the return of captured American slaves. Now, America's two main diplomats at the time were John Adams in London and Jefferson in Paris. Together they called upon Ambassador Abdrahman, the envoy of Tripoli in London in March of 1786. This dignitary mentioned a tariff of 3 payments for the ransom of slaves and hostages, for cheap terms of temporary peace, more costly terms of perpetual peace. And he did not forget to add his own commission as a percentage. This is, by the way, this is an ambassador of a state that sponsored banditry on the high seas, piracy and slavery, who was able to maintain an ambassador in London, who could negotiate terms of peace and collect a commission off of the deal. Adams and Jefferson asked to know by what right he was exacting these levies. The United States had never menaced or quarreled with any of the Muslim powers. Think about that. We're at a point in time where they were able to sit there in front of this man, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, names to conjure with in this country, speaking to this ambassador of Tripoli. And they said, why should you be doing this? The United States has never menaced or quarreled with any of the Muslim powers. Thomas Jefferson later reported to the State Department and Congress, quote, "The ambassador answered us that it was founded on the laws of their prophet, that it was written in their Koran, that all nations who should not have acknowledged their authority were sinners, that it was their right and duty to make war upon them wherever they could be found, and to make slaves of all they could take as prisoners." By what authority? Hey, it's our religion. Now, when you think about this, how can Muslims demonstrate against terror when it has its roots in the laws of Muhammad and is written in the Koran? Why should you expect people to take to the streets demonstrating against the things that people like this are doing? Don't expect it. I don't know how those 2 demonstrations ever got off the ground, as a matter of fact. The fact is, people talk about the Arab street. Well, rise up if we bomb Baghdad or someplace. Everybody should understand this. The Arab street is a one-way street. They only have permission to demonstrate against the West. They have little chance whatsoever to demonstrate the other way. It's a one-way deal, folks. Now, what I've read up until this point in Time magazine represents the thinking of the State Department. And things haven't really changed that much. It's in the nature of the State Department because they are diplomats. Their job is negotiation, it's bargaining, it's cutting deals, it's all this kind of thing. They think in terms of diplomacy, negotiations, deals, treaties, and they operate on the assumption that they are dealing with reasonable people, that just about anyone can be reasoned with. You know, there must be some way we can cut a deal and make it work. Now, Jefferson and Adams, I think, were able to see in dealing with the Barbary pirates that in the long term, no deal that you made with them would ever hold. That should have been clear right from the outset. And of course, anybody who understands about Islam as well should understand this, that in Islam, no treaty made with an infidel need be honored. That your word given to an infidel need not be honored. That if you lie to an infidel as a part of the process of gaining control in whatever it is you want to do, that's permitted to the religion. Because infidels have no rights, have no respect, have no standing, in fact, in Islamic law. It's as simple as that. And by the way, you are all infidels, in case you hadn't figured that out. Now, it must have been breathtaking to Thomas Jefferson and John Adams when the ambassador of Tripoli told them with all sincerity that they were infidels, and it was their that is Tripoli's religious duty to make war on infidels wherever they could be found and to make slaves of all they could take as prisoners. It must have been a jaw-dropping experience for them. I know I would have sat there, my disk would have slipped out of my computer about that time. I don't think I'd be able to compute what the man had just told me. Reality set in on Jefferson, who at that time was ambassador in Paris, and he was one of the diplomats who received this incredible statement from the Islamic ambassador. Now, returning to the article, Christopher Hitchens in Time magazine, Jefferson's recommendation was that the administration refuse any payment of tribute and prepare at once to outfit a naval squadron to visit the Mediterranean in strength. Ultimately, he proposed America should arrange for an international concert of powers composed of all those nations whose shipping and citizens were preyed upon. Justice and honor favor this course, he wrote, adding that it would also save money in the long run. Does that sound familiar to you? Now, Jefferson was in the State Department this time. He said, well, we need to see what we can do about it. We need to make a deal with all the other nations. We need to create in Jefferson's year, a new United Nations type of thing. And we'll put together all of our naval powers, and all of us together can go down there, and we can put a stop to this terrible thing. Adams agreed with him, but he didn't think that it was realistic or that it would ever happen. And in fact, in that day and time, it wouldn't happen because we really had no Navy at that time worth speaking of. Well, in the years that passed following this, a lot of things happened. Now, why am I taking the time to give you this little lesson in history today? Well, let's fast forward to the year 2004. An article by Walid Fares in the Washington Times, July 23, 2004. Can't get much more current. Fares' question, will the jihadists attack our political conventions? He says this, historically, jihadists draw from examples where infidels have been pit against other infidels. Divide and conquer, get them arguing among themselves, and you can win your cause without firing a shot. That's, they aren't the ones who originated this idea. It's as old as warfare. But one thing I want you to also take note of here, that Fares does not speak of terrorists, Islamic terrorists, or anything of the sort. He lumps this into a word which I've not seen used much. Jihadists. They are jihadis. They are involved in jihadism. And it is a warfare, jihad is, against the infidels for the expansion of Islam. And the whole idea that the jihad is the struggle a man has with himself and with whatever a man has to struggle with to overcome in order to be a good Muslim. Maybe there are Muslims who think that way. I would not necessarily question that there are. Those people are not our problem. There is a huge number of Muslims who do believe precisely this, that jihad is the way in which Islam is expanded. It is a holy war, and they actually took Islam all the way from Spain clean across India to the other side with the dictum, accept Islam or die. They conquered virtually all the territory today where you see Islam today was brought under the heel of Islam by the sword. It was their goal to reach and conquer the whole world by the sword, and at that day and that time they nearly got it all, because they didn't know about, at that time, some parts of the world that we now know about. Historically, jihadists draw from examples where infidels have been pit against other infidels. To bring them down is the will of Allah, they postulate. How to do it and in what circumstance is the job of the jihadi strategic planners. From Sudan to Afghanistan, jihadi tactics have wreaked havoc among their opponents' unity. Even the raids on New York and Washington were aimed at provoking chaos in the United States. Al-Qaeda's masters have a thorough knowledge of American political institutions and U.S. political cultures. Jihadi intellectuals have lived here, visited this country, and are constantly keeping themselves abreast of our nation's state of mind. Now you think about that. I know that it is true, but it's just kind of the bald statement of it still kind of sends chills up your back. They have been here. They know everything there is to know about us. They are fully informed, and they follow what's going on in this country day by day. After reading what he wrote, I concluded that if the jihadists do not attack the political conventions in this country, it will be because they could not. If they can, they will. The Democrats have made it through so far. But that may have been because of the draconian measures to protect the convention and their delegates. It may have just been impossible for the jihadists to penetrate what they had done in Boston to keep anything from happening there. They are prone to go after softer targets. They are prone to find their way through the weak spots. These people, we're not dealing with unintelligent people. They really are quite intelligent people. They're not supermen. I think it was Norman Schwarzkopf who made the comment. These are not super people, but the fact that they are willing to die for their cause gives them enormous power. The fact that they actually love death more than life makes them particularly dangerous to people who love life more than death. That's what we need to remember. It seems clear enough that if the jihadists had in possession a nuclear weapon, and if they could deploy it in either Boston or New York in these weeks, they would do exactly that. You should remember this. If it can be done, it will be done sooner or later. Probably one of the greatest dangers that we have in this country is political hatred. Now, what do I mean by political hatred? Well, I mean that during the 1980s, there was a significant slice of the political spectrum in this country that absolutely hated Ronald Reagan. Now, mind you, it wasn't just that they disliked him. It wasn't just that they differed with him on policy. It wasn't just that they thought there was a better way of doing things than what Reagan did. It wasn't just that they wanted to try to defeat him in the next election. They literally hated the man. Fast forward to Bill Clinton. There was a totally different slice of the populace that absolutely loathed and despised Bill Clinton and the ground he walked on. Fast forward again to George W. Bush. There's probably the largest slice of this whole pie, yet to this day, absolutely hates George Bush and would vote for a yellow dog before they would vote for George Bush for President of the United States. It's just the way things are. Right now, that is the most dangerous thing we face in this country, is political hatred, because it blinds us to real hatred. Half the country hates Bush, the other half of it hates Kerry, and the ones in between are sitting there sweating, why are people looking at us? There was an interesting cartoon, and I think today, Non Sequitur, which is one of my favorites, had this man, this woman sitting reading a newspaper, and the door of their house was, the door of the room they were sitting in was open, the television was there, and they're reading the paper, and he says, Martha, it says here that you and I are the only two swing voters left in the country. Let's immigrate to Canada. Now remember what I said. The aim of the jihadists is to divide the infidels. They have succeeded with the Philippines. They have succeeded with Spain very well in carving them off from whatever coalition there would be opposing them. They have also succeeded right here with a lot of help, I might add, from us. As Pogo, the possum, said, we have met the enemy and he is us. And we have really come to the place in this country where we have a terrible problem with political hatred on every corner. And it's blinding us to the dangers that face us. It is okay to oppose President Bush's policies. It's okay to think someone else should be president. It's okay to dislike John Kerry personally if you wish. It's okay to think he's pompous. It's okay to dislike his policies. It's okay to say he's a liberal. It's not okay to hate him. That's where we are being led down the garden path, and I don't know how we got here. I don't know who's fostered this. I don't know how they've done it. But we have come to the place in this country where we are in grave danger because of the division that has been driven among us. Now, why am I talking about this in a sermon? Answer, because it's a religious issue. It's vital that God's people know who their enemy is and what their enemy plans. Now, I've been taken to task from a couple of people for what they call supporting Bush's war. I consider that characterization one of the most asinine I've heard in recent memory. For one thing, it's not Bush's war. If I recall correctly, the people of the United States in Congress assembled, voted, and approved this war. That makes it our war. But it really, in a way, is not even our war. It's the jihadists' war, which we, the people, and our president either respond to or we become slaves. Literally. Literally. I'm not talking about this in some broad, strange term. I'm talking about literally becoming slaves. A Swiss-based human rights group went down to the Sudan, to the slave auctions there, and brought the freedom of 4,300 black African slaves in Sudan, primarily women and children, and they returned them to their families in the South. They said these people generally sold for about $33 to $50. This has taken place in the last 5 or 6 years. In the last 5 or 6 years, there have been slave markets in the Sudan where you could walk in and buy a human being for $35 to $55. Christian Solidarity International rescued 4,400 people by buying them as slaves. Someone pointed out that it's an exercise in futility because then they use the money from these slaves to go capture and buy more slaves, so you're just trading this slaves for that slaves. One 12-year-old boy, Yak, told of how he'd been kidnapped for his village by Arab raiders. Now, we are in Africa here, folks, and Arab doesn't mean Muslim. Arab means Arab. They are people who are, live on the Arabian Peninsula. They are a particular race of people. These people were the people who were the Barbary pirates. Nowadays, they call them Arab raiders. They had gone into the Sudan. He was kidnapped by his village by Arab raiders the year before, enslaved on a farm in the north of Matar. He told the story of how in a day he had been too sick to work. His master chopped off all the fingers on one of his hands as punishment. He had the right to do it. The boy was a slave. He had no rights. He was chattel, his property. It'd be like you taking a chair you got tired of, found uncomfortable and taking it out in the backyard and burn it. It's your chair. You can do that. Well, they want to cut off the fingers of a slave or kill him. They can do that. According to an article in the New York Times, approximately 17 million children live in slavery in Sudan. 17 million. A lot of them are Christian. You're a Christian in Sudan, they can take you, they can sell you, no problem. I guess they can't do it to Muslims, but there are a lot of animists and primitives, in southern Sudan, and of course there are Christians in southern Sudan, and these Christians have been commonly taken, captured, and sold. There's an item on CNN not long ago. The United Nations estimates that up to 15,000 southern Sudanese, mostly women and children, have been abducted in raids on southern villages by Arab militiamen in the last decade and taken to the north to be sold as slaves. Now, by what right do they do this? Because their religion demands it, permits it, gives them the authority. The laws of their prophet Muhammad, and it's written in the Koran that they can do this. Not only they can, they ought to do it. Goes on to say, but Sudan's government and parts of the international community have refused to accept that the practice still exists in a nation with a history of slave trading. They just won't look at it. You know why they won't look at it? Because they'd have to deal with it. It's as simple as that. The Assistant Secretary of State, United States, for African Affairs, Susan Rice, said, and I quote, "Part of why I am here is to show the world that despite what the government in Khartoum says, despite what some of our partners in the European Union may want to pretend, slavery exists. It has to be acknowledged, and it has to be addressed." Now, this isn't some far-off right-wing paper. This is CNN reporting this. And it's the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs of the United States is down there and says this. She says, I'm here, I'm walking, I'm going around here with the television cameras because I want the world to know slavery still exists in the Sudan. So when I told you, either we have to wake up and deal with this one way or the other, or we are going to become slaves, literally. It's only a question of how long it takes. Some of us are old enough, we'll probably be dead before it happens. Some of you are not. Now, American Muslims can fairly be asked. It's entirely fair of us to ask them what they believe and where they stand on this issue. And we should know. Their leaders should say. The problem is it's like pulling teeth to get any imam, that's their pastor of a given mosque, to get any imam to stand up and say, no, we reject, we condemn slavery, we condemn what is happening, we condemn jihadism, we condemn the terrorist acts of these people. I think I have seen one of them who, I think it was Bill O'Reilly, had him squirming on the hot seat, and he finally managed to get some kind of a twisted, convoluted or denunciation of terrorist activities out of this fellow. But since I understand that in their religion it's okay to lie to infidels, I don't know what to make of what the man said. He could say anything to us and not be held accountable by his God. Now, never forget this. These Arab raiders believe they are allowed to do this by the Koran. We used to ask how it is, as the end time approaches, that we find nations like Egypt, Libya, Syria, etc., mentioned in Bible prophecy, and no mention at all of the most powerful nation on the planet, the good old United States of America. Now, I want to turn the question on its head and ask this. How is it possible that the Bible, when prophesying of the last days, could ignore a power like Islam and a threat like the jihadists? Makes no more sense than ignoring who we are or what we're supposed to do or the role that anybody would play at the end time, because it should be obvious to anybody around that if we're living in the end times, or even if the end times are still quite a ways ahead of us, that Islam and the jihadist movement is going to become a very significant player on the world scene in the years just ahead of us. It's going to be there. And so consequently, I think we have to ask what this might say, what the Bible might say to us about it. I can't answer that question definitively today. I don't have enough time for one thing. But in Daniel 11, there's a prophecy that stands as a kind of popular benchmark among people who study this sort of thing. It's Daniel 11, verse 40. At the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, with many ships. He shall enter into the countries and overflow and pass over. The first time I remember hearing this, I must have been 9 or 10 years old, somewhere in that vicinity, because it was during World War II when people were looking at the Bible and wondering about things they read there. And I remember one night, I think I was sitting on the porch, and my elders were on the porch swing up there, and they were talking back and forth about what was going on in the world. And I remember someone quoting this scripture, at the time of the end, the king of the south will push against the king of the north. So people have been thinking about this for a very long time. Now, there is a point of view that holds that all biblical prophecy has long since been fulfilled, that there are no prophecies that remain to be fulfilled in the future. Historically, we look back and we say, well, that's probably, the king of the south almost has to be an Islamic power, maybe Egypt or one of those nations down there. And we looked at it and we've wondered about it. But then again, other people say, oh no, that was all fulfilled in the years subsequent to Daniel, Antiochus Epiphanes and all that, and it's all history. Well, you have to, there are two serious problems with this point of view. One is that any serious student of history and prophecy knows that there are many Old Testament prophecies that were never fulfilled. Now again, you have to know history along with your prophecy, your biblical history and your and prophecy. And if you go back and you make your way through the whole systematic study of this period of time, acquainting the prophets with their time in history, you are going to have to face facts. Some of the things they prophesied did not come to pass. Now, you have to explain that away in some fashion to hold the theory that all prophecy in the Bible is finished. It's all past. It is over. It has no future application ahead. Now, the second serious assumption here, is the assumption that when something prophesied has happened, that it is finally fulfilled. You follow me? I stumbled over that one, so I'll come back and I'll give it to you again. The second is the assumption that when something prophesied has happened, that it has been finally fulfilled. For something to happen and for something to be fulfilled may be two different things. The second of these assumptions is crucial to understanding what is coming down. To say that something is fulfilled is to imply that it is finished, filled completely, fulfilled. I have a concrete illustration of the problem that this idea creates. It's Jesus in the Olivet prophecy, Matthew 24. Matthew 24, verse 15. Jesus says this, "When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place." Whoever reads, let him understand. "Then let those who be in Judea flee into the mountains." Well, a person may say that was all fulfilled when the Romans sacked and burned Jerusalem in 70 A.D. It is already fulfilled. Now, that's not strictly speaking true. Because if you notice, Jesus spoke not merely of an abomination, but the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, right? Where did he speak of that? Daniel 12, verse 8. Daniel 12, verse 8. Daniel says, "I heard, but I didn't get it. I just didn't understand. I said, 'Oh, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things?' And he said, 'Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. A couple of things worth noting. One is, he says, what is this about the time of the end that this is involved? Okay, that's one thing. But of course, this abomination of desolation is mentioned earlier in Daniel as well. And what it's talking about is a specific occasion that came to pass after Daniel was dead, when a man named Antiochus Epiphanes, who was the ruler in the area of Syria to the north of Jerusalem, came down, conquered the area, set up an abomination right in the temple, made an altar in there, I think it was to Zeus, in the temple, and it's called the abomination of desolation. See, now here's the problem. The theory is that all Old Testament prophecies were fulfilled in the Old Testament. But here's one that was fulfilled in the Old Testament in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, and Jesus brings it forward and says, it's ahead of us, not behind us. So what do I say? I say, well, it happened after Daniel. It happened in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, but it was not finally fulfilled then. Was it then finally fulfilled when the Romans took Jerusalem and burned and sacked the city? How would you know? How could you be sure? There's an interesting thing about it. This thing turns up twice in Daniel. And the wording of that last one and the context of that last one leads most Christian people to think it's time of the end that he's talking about when it happens. You have to really understand what happened. Now, one of the things that I haven't got a clue, what happened 1,290 days after Antiochus set up that image in the temple in Jerusalem. I have no idea what happened 1,290 days after the Romans put that statue of Jupiter Olympus in the temple in Jerusalem. No idea. Which again leads me to wonder, was it not fulfilled? Did it not mean anything? Or is this yet still far ahead of us? Now, I'd like to return to Daniel 11 in the NIV, the New International Version. The prophecies concerning the nations. I'm switching to the NIV here because it is a little clearer, and it brings out some things which may differ slightly from the way we have commonly looked at this. And one point I think I need to make here is that with the passage of time and with the development of the geopolitical scene, I think it's really time for us to take a good hard look again at some of our theoretical constructs of prophecy. In other words, the whole layout that we have here of prophecy, which for many people has been taken as gospel. They've been taken as though that is the truth, and have actually made it a part of the doctrine of the church. In fact, it really should never have been that much. It really should have been the teaching of the church. That is, what we think we understand, and this is what we are teaching at the moment. It is a theory of prophecy. Just like you'll come into class and you'll teach certain theories of physics to your class, that this is a theory. We have to develop hypotheses. We have to test the theory. We have to see if we can falsify the theory. We have to work on this theory. Okay? What we have really advanced is a theory of prophecy. And it seems very evident to me with the developments that are taking place in the modern world that we need to once again go back and look at these things again and say, all right, which pieces need to be removed from this? And when we take them out, what's left? What's still there? What is there that we now know that maybe we didn't know 40 years ago that ought to be considered when we actually lay out what's going to happen in the end time? Well, in Daniel 11, the NIV, verse 2, now then I tell you the truth. An angel is speaking to Daniel. 3 more kings will appear in Persia, and then a 4th who will be far richer than all the others. When he has gained power by his wealth, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. Now, this is pure history. Pure history. Daniel is in Babylon in the days of Nebuchadnezzar. The Medes and the Persians have not come to full power yet, but they will. In the process of time, the Medes and the Persians will begin to dominate the scene. They will finally conquer Babylon, and it is the Persians who then allow the Jews to come back to Jerusalem at a later time. In the process of all their goings about, they stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king will appear who will rule with great power and do as he pleases. Now, it's very tempting, isn't it, to consider Alexander the Great as being that great king of the Grecians who will rise up following the reign and the dominance of the Persians and the Medes. He says, after he has appeared, his empire will be broken up and parceled out to the 4 winds of heaven. It will not go to his descendants, nor will it have the power he exercised, because his empire will be uprooted and given to others. This happened exactly this way to Alexander the Great. His kingdom was uprooted. It was divided up among his 4 generals who took over the different areas that he had conquered in his time. 2 of these particular generals or kingdoms that were established out of this were the Egyptians and the Syrians, one to the south, one to the north of Jerusalem. And become major players in the course of the events that follow in these years. And really, if you're studying history and prophecy, you basically have to accept the fact as you read this. This is talking about a very specific time in history and the events that would take place. Daniel is so specific about these events that Porphyry, one commentator many, many generations ago, came to the conclusion that Daniel didn't write this, that this had to have been written about 170 A.D., long after Daniel was dead, because Daniel could not have known these things. But of course that assumes, you go right straight to your conclusion, then you change your assumptions in this type of thing, because you're deleting entirely the possibility that which is what the Bible says, is an angel of God came and told Daniel what was going to happen in the future. So you're presuming that that was false in your conclusions. Well, the king of the king of the south will become strong. But one of his commanders will become stronger than he and will rule his own kingdom with great power. After some years, they'll become allies. The daughter of the king of the south will go to the king of the north to make an alliance, but she will not retain her power, and he and his power will not last. In those days, she will be handed over, together with her royal escort and her father and the one who supported her. Now, it's just basically talking about, and time will not permit me to go back and outline for you all of the events that went back. There was a war, ongoing war, going back and forth between the king of the north, the king of the south, down through all these years subsequent to Alexander's death. Now we come to verse 21. He will be succeeded by a contemptible person who has not been given the honor of royalty. He will invade the kingdom when its people feel secure. He will seize it through intrigue. Now, there's nearly, unanimous agreement that this is talking about a man named Antiochus Epiphanes. He is one of the line of Antiochus that actually ruled the northern of these 2 kingdoms, that is, in Syria. It says, then an overwhelming army will be swept away before him. Both it and a prince of the covenant will be destroyed. I'm assuming a prince of the covenant is probably talking about the high priest in Jerusalem. After coming to an agreement with him, he will act deceitfully, and with only a few people he will rise to power. When the richest provinces feel secure, he will invade them and will achieve what neither he nor his forefathers did. He will distribute plunder, loot, and wealth among his followers. He will plot overthrow of fortresses, but only for a time. With a large army, he will stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south. And so the war goes on, more and more. And it's in this course of time that he actually does, finally, go into Jerusalem and set up an abomination in the temple of God. In verse 36, it says, the king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god and say unheard of things against the God of gods. He will be successful until the time of wrath is completed, for what is determined must take place. Now, what's interesting here? You've been reading about Antiochus Epiphanes, a definite historical character, a dominant military commander of Syria in the, 2nd century BC. Now, the commentaries at this point, in particular the Ryrie notes on the NIV Study Bible, if you have those, immediately headlines this, the Antichrist. He has clearly understood that what we're dealing with here now is that one that's talked about in the New Testament, in 2 Thessalonians, and elsewhere as the one who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God. He will show no regard for the God of his fathers, or for the one desired by women, nor will he regard any god, but will exalt himself above them all. Instead of them, he will honor a god of fortresses, a god unknown to his fathers. He will honor with gold and silver, precious stones, costly gifts. Now, you can kind of see this developing out of Antiochus Epiphanes' time, at least in part. You can't see this as describing an Islamic power. For no Islamic power could ever do this. No person who claims to be a leader among Islamic peoples could claim to be God, oppose God, stand in the place of God, for all suddenly he would no longer be Islamic. Because there is no more rigidly monotheistic religion than Islam. You must understand that. And so consequently, some of the theories I've heard advanced as counter-theories to what some of these are talking about, it's not possible for an Islamic leader to be what is here called the Antichrist, the one sitting in the place of God declaring that he is God. It just won't happen. He will attack the mightiest fortresses with the help of a foreign god and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him. He'll make them rulers over many people and will distribute the land at a price. At the time of the end, the king of south will engage him in battle, and the king of the north will storm out against him with chariots and cavalry and a fleet of great ships. He'll invade many countries and sweep through them like a flood. Now, right here, Daniel becomes almost opaque. It's almost impossible to see clearly through what he's talking about here, because the NIV starts sounding like they're talking about the king of the north and the king of the south coming against a third party here, rather than the king of the north being opposed by the king of the south. You get lost in the pronouns where you can't, with any definitive surety, declare who that pronoun is referring back to. And so it goes on to say, sorry, I lost my place here. Oh yeah, verse 40. At the end, the king of the south will engage him in battle. The king of the north will storm out against him with chariots and cavalry and a fleet of great ships. He'll invade many countries and sweep through them like a flood. He'll also invade the beautiful land. Many countries will fall, but Edom, Moab, the leaders of Ammon will be delivered from his hand. Now, this power that's invading here is not Islamic. I think there are probably some commentators who advance a theory of prophecy that they still believe it's the end time, but they believe what is going to happen is the king of Egypt pushes north, and the king of Syria in Damascus pushes south, and two Islamic powers come down and invade the Holy Land. But this man of sin, this Antichrist, this person described here, cannot be Islamic. It's just not possible. Now, I suppose there's some theory that maybe some ruler of an Islamic land could do this kind of thing, but the problem with it is he would completely lose control of the population. He would absolutely lose control of his population with a snap of the fingers as soon as he declares himself to be God. He will extend his power over many countries. Egypt will not escape. He'll gain control of the treasures of gold and silver, all the riches of Egypt, like with the Libyans and the Nubians in submission. But reports from the east and the north will alarm him, and he'll set out in a great rage to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch his royal tents between the seas at the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one shall help him. Now, if you take it this way, where this person comes from is an interesting question, this third party that's in the Scripture. But it's easy to see that if tidings out of the north and the east start troubling him, that the tidings are the Islamic peoples that he has fought against before, who are north in Syria, east in Iraq, and of course the king of the south in Egypt and Saudi Arabia. So you've got this pincers movement that comes around it. But this Antichrist, who has set himself up in Jerusalem, is neither. He is certainly not Islamic. Chapter 12. At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress such as has not happened from the beginning of nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Now, where are we? Is this past? Is this something already, fulfilled way back in history somewhere? It seems to be that position goes, nose down in the dust at this point. Multitudes who sleep in the dirt will awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, close and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many shall go here and there to increase knowledge. Now I, Daniel, looked up. Before me stood two others, one on this bank of the river, one on the opposite bank. And one of them said to the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, How long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled? The man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river lifted up his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and I heard him swear by him who lives forever, and saying, It shall be for a time and times and a half. 3.5 years is what everyone sees in that particular prophecy. When the power of the holy people has been finally broken, all these things will be completed. Well, who's that? I'd say probably most commentators will talk about Israel. And there's not much question in my mind, I've said so on a radio program more than once, that there is another Holocaust in the future for Israel. It's just impossible that it could be otherwise. It's in prophecy, and it's shot through with it, that it's going to happen again. This says their power will be broken, and when that happens, then everything will be finished. I heard it, but I didn't understand, and I said, My Lord, what is going to be the outcome of all this? He said, Go your way, Daniel, because the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. Many will be purified, made spotless and refined, but the wicked will continue to be wicked. None of the wicked shall understand. Those who are wise will understand. From the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished, and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. To what? He doesn't say. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. Why? What's that? I don't know. The Bible doesn't say. I think if I'd kept them all, I could have a filing cabinet through of papers speculating about these two numbers. As for you, go your way till the end. You will rest, and at the end of your days you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance. Now I know that you do not understand everything I've given you today. I don't have any question. I would be very surprised if you did. For the simple reason is that it's not clear. I mean, there is so much in this that is left open to study, to thought, to understanding, and I think it is very clear. If I understand what he told Daniel is, nobody's really going to understand all this stuff until the time of the end. There are events that have to take place in the future. Those events will give us the key to understanding what it is that we're reading here. But in between now and then, you will probably also have an occasion to read a paper by someone or another, or hear a sermon by someone or another who purports to give all the answers to these passages of Scriptures. By all means listen. By no means believe. Because the fact is, we are still some time, I'm afraid, before we're going to begin to understand all that is written here. But the one thing is absolutely clear to me, and that is that the jihadists have declared war on Christianity, on the United States, on the Western world, upon the whole gamut of the world that is not Islam. And the rest of the world then will have to fight or become slaves. And I don't mean metaphorically. I mean literally slaves to an Islamic power that will put women in burqas and have all your children raised in a school where they learn absolutely nothing except the Quran. That's the future the jihadists would like to see for England, for the United States, for France, for Germany. One thing to keep your eye on: the Germans and the French have clasped this viper to their bosom, and they will probably be the first to fall. Keep your eyes open. This is a very serious and dangerous time in which we live.